calling of the James City County Board of Supervisors work session to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to our special guests for being here. Mr. Stevens, if you'll call the roll. Mr. Hipple has been delayed and should join us in just a bit.
Correct. Mr. McLennan? Here. Mr. Eisenhower? Here. Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
4 present.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move down here. Oh, okay, losing papers. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We have delegates Pogge and Mullen and Senator Mason. And we appreciate you being here. And how we're going to kick it off is go through our 2019 legislative program. And these are direct requests from us. Towards the end, we have pieces of legislation that we are supporting, and we're certainly glad to go through those with you. If any of my board colleagues have something that they'd like to add with those, or if you all have questions, we're happy to answer those as well. So this is legislation that we're asking to be introduced on behalf of the county. The first one is to amend the James City County Charter to add 7.5 to allow James City County to regulate inoperative motor vehicles pursuant to Virginia Code 15.2-905 on lots equal to or less than 2 acres. As you all probably know, there are a number of older non-HOA neighborhoods in James City County that have had issues with inoperative vehicles in plain sight view. The owners of these vehicles keep current license plates, but the vehicles have long expired inspection stickers. James City County is permitted to address inoperative vehicles under Virginia Code 15.2-904, which requires that the vehicles have neither a valid license plate nor a valid inspection sticker to be considered inoperative. 2 previous attempts to add James City County to the list of localities permitted to address inoperative vehicles under 15.2-905 have failed. This would have allowed James City County to declare certain vehicles as inoperative if they had either an invalid inspection sticker or an invalid license plate. This year, the board has opted to request that the General Assembly consider an amendment to the county's charter to achieve the same goal. The board held a public hearing on the proposed amendment at which no member of the public spoke in opposition.
Senator Norman said he's here. He'll be here in just a second.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, okay.
And I should add that Mr. Kinsman is here to answer any questions.
So we had a long discussion about this last year.
And the year before.
And the year before. And I carried it. And we got it through the Senate. And we ran into a bit of a problem in the House.
Yes.
And I was
Brenda?
not involved in that one. But I do like
Thank you, Senator Norman, for joining us.
the caveat here.
Apologize. A little more traffic.
Yes.
199.
Inoperative vehicles.
Okay.
Because when, we're formulating legislation, as you well know, words mean things. And the lack of words means things. So by putting, a more of a lasso around this and making it that it's less than 2 acres, it doesn't affect any farmland or rural agricultural areas or people. And those were the people that I had primarily heard from that were, again, to use the word primarily in my district, that were so upset at the proposed language. So I think that helps tremendously to have the less than 2 acres.
Well, we would really appreciate your support on the House side. And
Well, so are you supportive of this?
Well,
Because last year,
Died 51-49.
on a straight party line vote after being delayed several days. And so,
4.
I think certainly 3 of the 4 of us supported it last year. You did not. And I just don't want to mess with it again.
It did come to the House floor. I don't know.
Oh, you got beat on the House floor.
You got beat on
a
the
straight party line vote. Actually, one of our guys voted the wrong way. So it meant to be a party
He
line
went back
vote.
and he tried to amend it. He couldn't.
So does the 2 acres assuage your concerns about agricultural
It
challenge?
assuages my concerns, okay? I'm not committing I'll support it, but, I'm not going to go around and start any fires around it.
Good.
That's
that
all
may have been our problem
could
last
ask.
year.
okay.
You have to, give the matches to him.
And
We'll see.
And for the record, everyone on the Board of Supervisors supported this.
Yes,
And no one spoke in opposition to it
Correct.
at public meeting.
that's correct.
And, the less than 2 acres really gives me a lot more comfort. If it should pass, then I'm much more comfortable that the rest of the House, the delegates pass.
That's it.
I don't think you would need my vote on that anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next is to amend Virginia Code 15.2-2242 to allow localities the option of increased protection against developers who have not met all previous land development obligations. And the reason for this is in recent years, the county has been forced to call upon various forms of surety to complete residential developments when the original developer was unable or unwilling to do so. Calling upon these sureties cost the county considerable effort, time, and in some cases money, and we would be more than happy to talk to you about what we've been through this past year. The board has requested the General Assembly extend certain protections currently given only to the locality operating under the urban county executive form of government, Fairfax, to all localities. These protections include the ability to disallow bonds for developers who have failed to complete previous land development obligations. In addition, it would allow localities to increase allowances for estimated costs for other forms of surety, thereby minimizing the losses that may be sustained by a locality forced to complete the developer's obligations. And I have the next two, I believe, are also going to be in regards to along these same lines. So I'll move ahead unless there's a question. Amend Virginia Code 15.2-2241.A5 to allow localities to prohibit certain developers from recording remaining sections of a subdivision if previous land development obligations remain unmet. This relates to the previous request and would allow a locality to prohibit developers from recording remaining sections of a subdivision, as we said, if their obligations had not been met previously. Amend Virginia Code 15.2-2259 to allow the Planning Commission or other agent to withhold action on a subdivision plat if development obligations for prior recorded sections remain unmet. Any questions?
Can I ask a question generally? So one of the things that counties, cities, and towns in the House have dealt with over the course of the last 3 years have been a number of requests from localities to change the proffer system that was set up in 2015. And the general proposition has been to wait and see how it's worked out over the course of the last 3 years. And I think that there's a general consensus that there is an opportunity to maybe make some adjustments now. This is something new that the county is requesting, as opposed to the requests that have been previously met when it comes to changes to the proffer system. Can you talk a little bit about what the county's thought process was?
Yeah, we still have our concerns with that system. I don't think that
I understand that, but there's a lot of...
Yeah.
So the board has on their supported legislation, not the direct legislation, but support to amend the proffer system.
Sure.
And look at the exactly what we had in there. It was impact fee system as well. We've seen a bunch of those bills sort of floating around and just support some changes to that. This addresses developments that have already been approved and are on the ground versus the proffers, which are for future development. We've had a number of situations where these are early 2000s developments where developers have left, and then we are left holding the surety and trying to figure out, okay, how do we stop continued development on that while we're trying to fix what has already not been done.
So somebody promised to be able to build a pool for the community, or somebody promised to be able to build a road? Or
infrastructure.
Infrastructure, so it's roads.
It's stormwater and roads.
Okay.
And it's tough because citizens don't see them, but it costs a whole lot of money because it's underground and you have structures on top of it now. We've done an extensive amount of work out in settlement of Monticello, and most of it's been underground.
And the county has been responsible for the cleanup work on that?
We called upon the sureties to do it, so the bank has paid for it, and in that case, Fulton Bank has been really good about doing that. It's not been easy, and we don't, of course, recoup any of our costs for administrative time and review and outside engineering. So we're in for at least $100,000 on that one alone, and that's just for outside work to try to help the bank finish up the developer's obligation.
It has led to almost a full-time position of somebody here on the county to answer questions and concerns, serious concerns from the citizens. And then we did, in our budget last year, we did create the position of hiring an outside engineer because we simply did not have the staff time any longer to devote to it. So we've been out. That is something the county's taken on, is to have an outside engineer.
And then what happens is developer moves to another area and wants permission to develop after not having completed his obligations to the county?
That's correct. We can actually do that in another section of the same neighborhood because we don't have the ability to say no for a subdivision plat for that particular circumstance. You didn't finish phase one. We can't stop you from platting phase two.
The taxpayer's $100,000.
In this particular development, yes.
And minimal, yeah.
Yes. And it's not, and it is the obligation to the county, but it's also the obligation of the people that are living there, because they buy there in good faith that the developer's going to do what they're supposed to do, and they don't, and then they're turning to us to do, and so we've tried to step in where we could.
So,
what are the objective criteria going to be in 1.3 and 1.4 to deny the developer those opportunities?
I think we would look to the criteria that are set out for 1.2, which is in 15.2.851.1A. And Senator Norman, I don't recall what that is. It was more precise than I figured it would be.
Using a word I hate, but in the interest of transparency, I would not be supportive of 1.3 and 1.4 without some objective criteria against which a builder would know what the expectation was, as opposed to leaving it to the subjectivity of the planning department. And that's not a criticism of the planning department whatsoever.
Okay.
and my question is, we have 3 pieces of legislation all basically addressing the same problem. I'm wondering, is there a way that can be worded to be one piece of legislation? Or, I'm sure that the state is looking out reforms too, because we've been looking at this for a couple of years with the proffers, and we did something at 15. So I'm wondering, why does it take 3 pieces of legislation?
Knowing a little bit about a tactical situation during the legislative process, you put all 3 of them together and you're rolling the dice on an all or nothing situation. I'm being very practical.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I really am. As opposed to having an opportunity to maybe getting a portion of the cake rather than lose the whole cake.
Each of these could stand alone to make a difference, and because I haven't had enough time to read and absorb it all. But I can see where the 3.
All right. So the next 3 all deal with requests that stem from a series of dog attacks in the colonial heritage community and have been requested by residents in that community. The first request allows a court to impose additional fines upon a dog owner to compensate for emotional distress. The other 2 requests seek to ensure that fewer attacks occur through the requirement of appropriate physical barriers and the threat of additional fines by allowing dogs to roam in packs. So we are asking to amend Virginia Code 3.2-6540 and 3.2-6540.1 to permit courts to order restitution for emotional distress in addition to actual damages caused by dangerous or vicious dogs. Amend Title 3.2 of the Virginia Code to permit localities to require that all dogs be contained in an enclosure appropriate to their size and strength while outside. Amend Title 3.2 of the Virginia Code to permit localities to impose civil fines upon owners of dogs who allow the dogs to roam in packs of 2 dogs or more while off the owner's property, exempting dogs used for lawful hunting activity.
I will add that these stemmed, as Chairman Larson stated, from meetings that we had with citizens after a series of attacks took place up in Colonial Heritage. So Mr. Kinsman and myself met with some of the citizens, and these are some of the requests that they've made based on those attacks.
How does 1.5 and excuse me?
Is that already?
How about 1.6? How does that react with any potential leash draw?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
I think that would be incredibly difficult to monitor and impose.
And also with invisible fencing, I'm wondering how.
Well, Senator, I would just suggest that I've been involved in a surprisingly large number of dangerous and vicious dog cases, which I wasn't planning on doing as an attorney. And so the 6-foot requirement for fencing around a dog that's already been previously declared vicious, as well as the secondary requirement that it requires that they be leashed at all times. I'm wondering whether or not, in the circumstances that led to this particular incident, whether or not one of those 2 already pre-existing requirements were not being met. Because in all honesty, the vicious dog cases that I've been involved in had more community involvement than some of the murders that I've been involved in. And it's something that brings a lot of people out. And the requirements for being able to keep a dog that has been declared vicious in Virginia is relatively strenuous.
It's easier to euthanize them. It really is. I'm serious. The enclosure, you forgot the muzzle part.
Yes, it is
bond
not.
You have to post the insurance liability.
It is a tremendous amount of legal and physical responsibility that one has if you are to properly contain a vicious dog. And I'm wondering whether or not that was done in the circumstance of this particular incident.
Do you recall, Adam, what the fencing situation was with these particular dogs?
I believe our animal control had the fencing situation in order. I think the dog went out the front door. The dog has since been euthanized.
I'm sure.
Yay. On 1.5, can't the court already order restitution for emotional distress? Is there no granting of that that a judge can make if he determines to? It's a civil case. The damages are actual damages and emotional distress.
So I'm definitely more of a criminal attorney than a civil, and so I defer to the greater civil minds of the table than I. But yes, that is something that would be available under a general lawsuit. I wonder, and I'm not familiar without looking these up, these 2 particular code sections, so I don't want to spout off and give legal advice without actually having done the research. So I don't know if that's available under these particular statutes.
Delegate Pogge, I think you could go at that in a separate civil case, but I don't think that's something that would be available under, if you're doing it as a charge under a dangerous or vicious dog. I think it was actual damages. So emotional would be a new
It'd be
a new wrinkle in that particular code section. You could do a separate civil suit.
Which would involve a separate filing fee, but would be otherwise available to the person.
And would take you completely in the private attorney realm versus commonwealths and counties attorneys.
How come is the county attorney involved in this? I thought it was mostly the Commonwealth's attorney.
We do a fair amount of dog cases. I've seen Senator Norman a few times in that court.
I'm sure all the dogs that he's involved with are not vicious at all, right?
And not all of them are 4-legged.
Oh, already.
You want to move on from that?
So these are positions and legislation that is supported by the county. The next few, as you can see, impact fees, proffers, underground electric utilities, House Bill 1615, increased funding for Virginia Department of Emergency Management, state funding for tourism, support widening of I-64 to 295, maintenance of new and existing secondary roads, application of transient occupancy tax to travel companies and internet sales, enhanced rail service on the peninsula and to Richmond. These are carryovers, of course. Support Thomas Nelson Community College in its efforts to build the Advanced Integrated Manufacturing AIM Center in James City County. Substance abuse and mental health treatment. Tax equity between cities and counties. Allow advertisement of required public notices on localities' websites and through other means instead of publication in a newspaper having general circulation. State funding for public education, pre-K, K-12, and higher education. Adequate funding for public libraries. No new state mandates and eliminate or adequately fund existing state mandates. Legislative programs of the Virginia Municipal League, the Virginia Association of Counties, and the Virginia Coalition of High Growth Communities. James City County supports continued funding of the Stormwater Local Assistance Funds. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up here. State funding for mandated services provided by community service boards. That is all.
Nonpartisan redistricting.
Nonpartisan redistricting. Sorry,
Page was about that.
I'll take that page. So my colleagues want to add.
Let me say a few words about the impact fee and proper legislation. The Coalition of High Growth Communities is an organization that represents communities that are experiencing what the state defines as high growth communities, which is a pretty liberal one in the sense that it's 5% over the course of a decade. Most of the communities that are interested in participating are actually growing at a much faster rate than that. James City, as you probably know, is among the fastest growing counties in the state and localities as well, including the cities. So a good number of cities are actually growing at a fairly decent rate right now. But the Senate Local Government Committee had sessions this summer and fall dealing with the issues of the proper system and the legislation that was passed a couple of years ago and the consideration of impact fees and the like. And I think they've reported out 2 bills that would be considered during the session. We also know that the Home Builders Association has been working on drafts of legislation and has been consulting with local government attorneys on those matters. The coalition, which had a meeting up at the BACO conference at the Homestead a couple of weeks ago, had a very good discussion in a very well-attended session, and we are trying to establish a set of principles that we would like to see in legislation. Obviously, as you all know, there are concerns that we have as fast-growing communities about the costs that are imposed upon localities by virtue of fast growth in terms of infrastructure, schools, roads, other facilities that have to be addressed. And at the same time, we also have other kinds of requests and needs through the proper system for easements, for other things that are non-monetary in nature, but in some way or another alleviate some of the impacts that rapid growth may have. And I think what we are coming to the conclusion of is that the proffer system, which was sort of a kind of quick fix to a problem that localities couldn't identify the means by which they would be able to afford rapid growth, were encouraged by the development community to basically say, well, we'll help you out through a system whereby we can, in fact, give you some means of addressing that growth. It was never really the best solution, not really the fairest solution to the kind of need for development of more infrastructure. Lots of states are using impact fees, and the monetary side of this is something that appears to be better addressed, more equitably addressed through some kind of impact fee system that would say to anybody who's proposing new development in the community, whether that is by right or what requires legislative action, would more equitably and efficiently spread the cost of that development. So local governments are interested in that, but we want to make sure that it is going to be something that is provided at a level that is actually going to allow us to meet the needs without imposing undue costs on longtime residents of folks who are already in the community, have already invested heavily in providing the kinds of infrastructure that has been proven to be attractive. So we would like to see some kind of change in the system. We don't think that the changes that occurred as a result of the 2016 legislation are working very well. And we're anxious to see what the development community would like to propose as a way of curing the problems that were created by that legislation. And then we can kind of work with them based on the principles that the high-growth communities would put forward as something that we'd like to see in the legislation. The Coalition of High-Growth Communities is not really an organization that takes a firm stand one way or another, pro-growth or slow development. It's an organization that basically says, help us to have the resources we need to address the effects that growth will have on our communities. And let us figure out how to best deal with that in our local communities, but don't tie our hands behind our backs and don't make it difficult for us to find the ways to think about the impact of growth without being sort of hamstrung fiscally.
I will add that having been at the VACO conference, just speaking in general terms, every single breakout session that I attended, no matter what the topic, it always circled back around to this proffer system and how it is causing issues. Can I put it like that? That and unfunded mandates. That circled around no matter what the title of the discussion was of the day. Every single locality talked about unfunded mandates. And we here in James City County, we call it the P word because we're not allowed to say the proper word. So the P word and unfunded mandates. So that's how we stay out of trouble.
And we do, I think this time around, have a very robust group of communities that have been affected by the legislation who want to work together to send a very clear message that we want to have a good faith effort to fix the problem, and that we're trying to identify core principles that we think ought to be included in any change that occurs. So I guess my basic message would be we might want to move slowly this year on this particular question because the legislation that came out of the local government committee this year, despite their best efforts, probably doesn't represent a consistent and coherent resolution to this problem. But I think we can make some real progress this year, and it may take another year, but certainly there's a good faith effort going on.
Good.
Any other comments or questions?
I would just, speaking on that point, one of the things in speaking with the home builders as well as VACO and VML, I think that there's a general consensus that eliminating the dichotomy between those who are developing by right versus those who are developing by request is something that all people involved in residential and commercial growth agree would be a new and more fair balance to be able to strike. Mm-hmm. I think the question is how one goes about that. But, you know, the fact that this was disproportionately falling on those who are asking for an administrative change as opposed to those who are developing by right is a particular concern.
Mm-hmm. Right, and frankly, in our community, with the large number of pre-approved lots that have not yet been developed, we're, again, putting ourselves in a bad position, because there are lots of places that are not at all subject to a proffer system that might produce the revenue we could use to deal with school construction and parks and recreation facilities and all the other kinds of infrastructure needed. And it would be a lot better if we could equitably spread that across all new development, whether it's by right or requires legislative approval.
Anything else?
I have a question on 2.6. You know, there's a moniker out there that has affectionately been put around my neck called the Tommy tax. And if you don't remember, let me help you. That for many years we have been asking the Virginia Tourism Corporation to put more money into advertising the historic triangle, and we're competing against the entire state. And we were getting somewhere between nothing and crumbs. And so ambitiously, which I'm sure I will hear about in 2019, I put through that tax with the help of some folks, either by standing down and not being particularly vocal or supporting it. And I have no intentions of asking Virginia Tourism Corporation for more money for the historic triangle, because you just got a windfall. And a portion of that is supposed to go to the tourism promotion, and a portion you have discretionary funding on, which there are a variety of opportunities that you could use that money for.
So I would just add that you say in competition with others in the state. I mean, as you yourself have pointed out, there are surrounding states that give a lot more money to tourism. So perhaps if you don't wish to promote not promote the historic triangle, but if you don't want to make it all about the historic triangle, just trying to get Virginia itself to be perhaps a little bit more money into tourism for the state in general, because as you've told me, West Virginia gives a whole lot more money. South Carolina, those types of places. And, we lost our, Karen Reardon went down to South Carolina, which is in direct competition with us, Myrtle Beach and Williamsburg, historic triangle area. So, and she's got, I think she probably tripled or more, even more so, the tourism budget that she has. So we would just ask that if you are uncomfortable with the historic triangle, just continuing to try to get money for all of Virginia to bring tourism to our fine
That's
Commonwealth.
Very collegiate and ecumenical of you for the Commonwealth.
Yes. So what if they come to Richmond, I'm sure they'll come our way.
And I hope we're prepared to take full advantage of a lot of the money put towards the 2019 celebration. A lot of money put towards Jamestown settlement, Yorktown, a lot of the work being done there.
Yeah.
As well as the almost 3 or 4, maybe 4 times additional marketing money that will come with our new structure.
So we've just gotten our first disbursement from the state, because it as you know, it takes a while to set these things up. So we did a request for quotes, and we've now got our bank, and I was at the chamber today to sign the signature cards. So we are making progress there. We have approved our marketing budget for next year. And so, and we are meeting December 4th to talk about our budget moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you. And could I point us to 220? I think we're doing a lot of good work on the community service board's effort. The STEP Virginia program is a big positive. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time with them in the next couple of days. I think Mike is as well.
Yep.
There's some new plans coming out of a new director thinking about what we're going to do with our community services boards. And going back to the last director, I was very positive about their future plan for the community services boards, with a couple exceptions. And that's, we have averaged, since I've been doing this, right at 200 people on the extraordinary barriers list. Now, the most who eligible for discharge from our state-run mental facilities would know where to go. And the last director's plan had a couple of pages that said we're going to take that list from 200 next year down to 130, and then the next year from 130 to 170. Well, I'll take you back to the 16 people that we got out of Eastern State and put in 2 different group homes in Williamsburg and James City County. And, I think you can remember how well that went over. And that was 16. And we have 200 people we're trying to place. So I have said, I'm trying to help as much as I can. I don't see the mechanism. I don't see the money. I don't see the facilities. I don't see the direction for us getting to the numbers that you're getting to. Okay? I say that to you in response to this because now we're seeing more. Almost every conversation or every slide presentation I see on community services boards has a bullet that speaks to local funding and local responsibility and local input monetarily. And so, I wouldn't deem this an unfunded mandate, but you need to put this clear. Someone in this county needs to every day be focusing on the great work being done by our community services boards, but watching the direction of our new administration and I think they're trying to do a lot of positive things, but I think the devil is in the details of how we get there. And I don't want to show up one day with us saying, we used to fund all this, but you know what? Colonial behavioral health, you're going to have to go back to your localities and find that additional $2 million, $1.8 million. I'm starting to see more conversations about local responsibility. And so I think we should keep a really close eye on that.
May I follow up a little bit with Senator Mason's comment? So I believe December 4th is when the Deeds Commission is going to be meeting again, and during which time we're expected to hear a number of extensive recommendations that are going to come out of that commission. And I honestly have no idea what they're going to be, but those are going to be pretty sweeping in terms of how they're going to be recommending that we change both the relationship between localities and the CSBs, as well as the state general approach to mental health. And I would hope that Mr. Kinsman, Mr. Stevens, as those recommendations come out, that you would be able to offer to us in the delegation your opinions as to what the recommendations of the Deeds Commission will do to affect James City County, because I expect that those recommendations will be extensive, and it will not be immediately obvious the interplay between James City County, the CSBs, the other localities, as well as the state. And we'd love to be able to hear from you all as to what those will end up being.
And we have Sue Mellon, our CFO, sits on the board. So I'm sure she'll be able to give us some feedback on that. So we'll make sure.
Thank you.
We'll follow up with that. Yes. So I know that I attended their legislative program breakfast, and your aide was there and was stepping in to try to get some information, to try to help with some mandates that are coming down, and then some concern they're having over some unintended consequences of Medicaid expansion. So, all right. Anything else?
I wanted to just raise a point that's sort of related to a lot of what's in this package. I know that there's a never-ending list of places where money could be applied successfully to achieve great things. And I know that there is some possibility of some additional money coming into the Commonwealth because of better than anticipated rate of growth and so forth. In thinking about how to allocate any additional resources that might be available, Chairman Larson and I had an opportunity to talk at the VACO conference after he made a presentation with Jim Regenball, who I'm sure you all know, who's done a lot of work for local governments on budget matters. That one way that would help all of us would be to address to some degree the funding for VRS for teachers, because it would lower the rate of contribution that we might have to make. and gives a little bit more flexibility to us in terms of trying to meet other needs. So just mention that it's not to assume that all new monies might be able to be dedicated to that purpose, but that there is a real positive aspect to addressing that need in terms of increased flexibility.
If I could just throw something out there, and I never pretend to be a numbers guy by any means, but last week the Governor's Commission on Revenue Forecast met, which consists of a number of CEOs and banking personnel from around Virginia, and they go into executive session and they're asked to endorse either a standard revenue forecast, a more positive revenue forecast, or a not so positive revenue forecast. The governor in public session, in his opening comments, repeatedly used the word surplus. And when asked for the opportunity to speak, I reminded him, at least in the minds of some of us that work with the state budget, there is no surplus. There are unanticipated revenues, and that is much more than a semantical argument. But there's already enormous outreach for additional funding in every imaginable sector you can contemplate. You've read about Medicaid, not expansion. Medicaid, the miscalculation, which is going to fall between 420 and 500 million bucks. The Catawba hospital situation, where the feds are refusing to reimburse the state because psychiatric services were not certified. The liability is $117 million on that. The governor has proposed that on low-income tax credits, that those taxpayers who do not pay taxes but are entitled to a credit receive the difference between the used credit and the unused credit. And so he wants to return about $250 million to people who are not paying taxes. On top of that, as you well know, sensitive to you and I, discussions about higher education reserve fund. We've got 3% salary increases coming in. There are mandatory deposits in the rainy day fund, which may require a super deposit. There's also a mandatory deposit in the Water Quality Improvement Act. So even though there's a projected unanticipated revenues, there are some mandatory calls on it, and then there are some policy discretionary calls on it. And those are the ones I can just tick off on the top of my head. But you're absolutely right. But I just want to make it very clear, there's going to be a lot of competition for the revenues that are available after the mandatory deposits that we have to make.
Whatever that number is, what did we determine at your Finance Committee hearings that the percentage forget what number it is, but it's like 68% is allocated one way. You start with 34. Of that 34, a certain percent is allocated. Wasn't it like 15 to 17%?
It was somewhere between about 15 and 18% that might involve discretionary spending once you get out of the mandatory situation.
Whatever the top line number is. Wow.
Sure. I didn't no argument that there are.
I don't say it argumentatively. It just I just hate for people. Even if the media is reporting it, I hate for people to say there's a surplus out there, because it really is a totally misnomer, and that there are mandatory payments that have to be made before we would get to the discretionary. And of course, this is an ill-advised comment, and I accept it. But on that discretionary spending, and last time I checked, 2019 is an election year for the entire General Assembly, which is going to be incredibly competitive. And so there are going to be those that would like to direct the balance of the unanticipated revenues in particular areas that might look good on the front of a brochure.
And they're working off of a a number in their head that we have $600 million that we can spend when, just like you said, that was already taken care of. Any expected surpluses were already taken care of in the last budget and where they would go.
Yeah. And there is another thing. As you all know, that Virginia's remained vigilant in trying to protect its AAA bond rating. And the budget was not reported timely last year and certainly wasn't reported in any way that I will ever endorse. But there, is an awful lot that is going on there, on the budget issues that we've got to deal with, and it's not all political. But I read in the paper this morning, one of the things that a colleague of mine who is a doctor is advocating is we did the Medicaid expansion reimbursement to hospital providers, but we didn't do it to frontline physicians. And Senator Donovan, who is a doctor out of Henricus, is going to put that bill in. But the governor's calling out for it. That's about another $60 million. So as we get closer to the kickoff day in January, you're going to see more and more of these putting in, and somebody's going to have to make a really, really hard decision on where the spending goes.
Right. I certainly agree with that. And just wanted to lay out the possibility that there was one way in which some of the obligations that the state really has not been able to fund fully in the past, in terms of contributions to the VRS, could have some additional benefits in terms of freeing up money for both the state and localities by reducing the rate of contribution that we needed in the future.
I think we're still paying back a portion of that loan that we took on.
Yeah.
Well, I call it a loan. It was a decline to make the mandatory deposit that was to be amortized over 10 years, and we've tried to accelerate that repayment. But there is a mandatory repayment, whether or not we choose to go beyond that. But I just read something from VRS this morning on the actuarial liability issue, and reminding Senator Hanger and Delegate Jones and myself about continuing to curtail that obligation.
And if I could just very gently suggest that while low-income Virginians may not pay income tax, they do pay taxes.
I would expect no less.
So before we say goodbye to you all, let me thank you again for coming today. Let me make sure, I hope all of you have had a chance to meet Scott Stevens, our new county administrator. I'm very glad that he's here. It's his first time going through this process. And thank Mr. Kinsman for all of his work that he did, and thank my colleagues as well. And also ask that if you would consider picking up any of these pieces of legislation that we've shown you today that are important to our county, to please let us know. And we hope that you will. So.
And just to finish, each of you unanimously supported this entire legislative package in each end.
So we're going to do a brief recess while we have the delegation.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Ms. Larson. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry. We have Mr. Richardson, our Planning Commission Chair. And are you going to introduce Mr. Haldeman, or do you want me to?
I shall.
Okay.
I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Jack Haldeman, who is our Policy Committee Chair, and of course, Mr. Paul Holt, our Director. This session is really to provide us an opportunity to work with staff here to share information to the Board of Supervisors and to obtain any guidance on the development of various work program ideas throughout the year. And as we looked, we did have a May 22, 2018 work session where we were asked to consider limiting the number of residential dwelling units that could be transferred via master plan consistency determination, limiting the number of residential dwelling units. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Holt.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, members of the board. Good afternoon. What we would like to propose today is a bit of a framework, as we've done on 2 other occasions. Policy Committee has spent some time considering various ordinance amendments and some other items that were brought up at the joint work session earlier this year. And I think it'd be very helpful for the Policy Committee to get a little bit more understanding from the board about proposed direction and path. So again, as we've set up previous memos, we've set up the memo that's currently in front of you. We have a couple of paths, forks in the road, so to speak, or a couple of choices to pick. And with that, I'll just sort of jump into the first item, if this format still works for you. Again, as mentioned at its May 22nd work session, the board had asked the commission to consider limiting the number of residential dwelling units that could be transferred via a master plan consistency determination that's made under section 24-23 of the zoning ordinance. Currently, that section of the zoning ordinance states that all final development plans shall be consistent with the master plan, but that deviations may be permitted if those proposed changes are determined to be not significant. The ordinance sets the criteria for those items to be considered as if the general location or classification of housing units or buildings is significantly altered, if the distribution of recreation or open space areas is altered significantly, if the road layout is significantly changed, or whether or not significant changes to the character of the land use results. Such requests are currently initiated through the planning director, and applicants may appeal a planning director decision to the Development Review Committee, or DRC. That's a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission ultimately determines that proposed changes are significant, master plan amendment would be required, or a proposal with fewer changes could be resubmitted by the applicant. Policy Committee discussed this code section and possible revisions and all possible combinations, as I recollect, on July 10th and August 9th, and has requested the board provide input on a couple of various options. We'll start at a high level with the first 2 options.
Before we do that, Paul, can I ask just one question?
Yes.
I understand the criteria that are being evaluated in terms of what kinds of things might trigger a different consideration. Mm-hmm. Everything except for what determines significant.
Sure. And that's the where the art of it comes in, both either at the planning director level or at the DRC and planning commission. There's not a quantitative definition of that. It's really in the context of those qualitative measures if something has changed significantly.
That took up a fair amount of one of the policy committee meetings was just that question.
If I can also throw in here, we set this, if I remember correctly, we set this procedure up. We didn't have a procedure like this before. We set it up sometime 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where the planning director would make the call, and then the appeal would be to the DRC, because there was I remember the board doing that at some point or another.
That's been the direction of a lot of code changes probably over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, has been to try to get some more things accomplished at the staff level and use the DRC as an appellate body. So there have been several consistent code changes over the years to that effect. So with that, option 1 that's presented in your staff report could be that after further consideration from the May work session that no changes to the current process are desired at this time. Or option two would be a clarification to the policy committee on if the board wants to see all proposed master plan consistency determinations or just those that are currently reviewed by the DRC and Planning Commission. Again, those that are determined to be not substantive or that do not contain significant changes are typically handled at the staff level. So that would be sort of the first level question that would help the policy committee.
So in terms of that, it struck me that it's hard to make a judgment without some additional information. So I was wondering if it would be possible to maybe get a spreadsheet that would show what changes had been made over some reasonable time period.
Sure.
I don't know what's the average number of such changes that would occur in a year. How many would occur in 5 years? Have we gone through a period in which there haven't been very many versus an earlier time period in which a lot had occurred?
Sure. I'll be happy to get you a detailed list of those projects. I think anecdotally at a high level, we did do some of that research for the policy committee. We actually, for them, looked back over the last 5 years. At the staff level, there could easily be a dozen or two that happen over the course of a year. Over the last 5 years, we've had a total of 18 cases go to the DRC. So for items that were appeals of the planning director determinations, 6 of those over the last 5 years have involved moving around residential units or residential density. And so I think the one that folks are very familiar with from this year was that Stonehouse density transfer that happened earlier. I think a year or two ago, we had a request from Colonial Heritage. They were turning some model homes into some overnight rentals. We had Windsor Mead, Villages at Candle Station, Colony's Timeshare was a bit of a while ago, and some ones out at Grain Springs. Those were the 6 cases that involved moving around residential density. We had 12 others that were various items, whether it be a change in architectural details, construction of a swimming pool where the master plan showed something else, encroachment into a landscape buffer, would be those types of details. But we can get you that list.
Since I was the skunk at the lawn party here when we started all this and by raising the issue, let me come back and say I want to couch my comments in terms of I believe that what we set up was to try to get most of the routine stuff off the board and put it where it needed to be with the staff and the DRC. And I don't think that there is any, for the most part, for what we're doing, I think that works well. What concerned me was that there were 3 specific instances recently that that dealt with what I would call community expectation. And I'll go back and talk about what I mean by that. When I bought into Ford's Colony in 1994, it was going to be about 2,000 homes. Well, we're at about 3,200 now. But at every step of the way, when that master plan was amended, there was a public process where we added to the master plan or we altered the master plan, and everybody in the community had the opportunity to weigh in at a public hearing if they wanted to. And when it was finally approved, everybody said, okay, that's where we're going now. And that was the expectation of the community. I think what occurs is that there are changes that occur, and specifically it's the one where, you know, Stonehouse came to you and said, okay, this is and you said this is a significant change. Now, there's no really truly objective criteria. It's an interpretation, but you made that interpretation, and the DRC made a different interpretation, and I can't say that they made a bad interpretation. It probably was a very good interpretation. The concern was that it was an interpretation that got made without the benefit of a public hearing. And so what I would look at is, I like the way we're doing things, but I think that the simplest solution to me would be that if you make a determination that it's significant and they want to appeal it, the appeal process should be back to the board. I think should be back to the board, because we're the ones who would have to do it anyway. That wouldn't occur very often. We had one in Ford's Colony where there was a proposal to change condos to rental apartments. That really got everybody's attention. There were some really upset people in the community. And the first question I got asked was, can they do this administratively? Or do we have an opportunity to weigh in? And I said, well, this should be a change to the master plan, which should come to the board as a legislative case. And I felt that would have been a substantive change. And I have confidence that you guys make a determination of what is and isn't substantive pretty much the same way we would. So I'm sort of on this option too, because I think there needs to be some small change, but I really don't want to make a significant change to the way things are going, because I think for the most part they're working well. I think it was Stonehouse, it was Ford's. Oh, and the other one that I remember was in Newtown. Part of the problem we have to deal with, a lot of these master plans are very detailed, very up to date, very modern. Some of these master plans were done on the back of an envelope years ago. Right. And you take a look at them, and there's very little guidance in the master plan. Right. And so I'm very concerned that, like when we had Newtown trying to sweep some of these residential units when they did Founders Village, they wound up trying to sweep everything they could from all of Newtown and just force it into a very small area. And if it could be done administratively, I think it would have really caused problems. That's when it had to be a rezoning anyway, so that was it wasn't a factor. But it's that kind of a problem where you have a master plan that says, okay, you can put 100 houses in this bay, but if you realistically looked at it with RPA and everything and what they wanted, they probably couldn't get 75. Well, there's 25 extras right there. Does that mean they can take them and increase the density somewhere else? How does that affect the character of the community? So after thinking about it very long and hard and having some really long, detailed discussions with planning commissioners about it over the last couple of months, I think that the only thing I would do is to maybe change the appellate process for that to the board. I don't think it would increase our workload. I think it would still keep, for the most part, the determinations for truly administrative things where it needs to be.
So it's not just an increase in the density, it can also be a shifting of the density.
Absolutely.
And one of the other things we talked about was a shift in the type of housing.
Yes.
So if you're going from
condos,
single family to condos,
yeah.
or vice versa.
In this case, in our community, it was condos to rental apartments. Because rental apartments were not part of what was envisioned in that master plan. There was no mention of those anywhere in there. And the concept that maybe that could be brought forward, really got a lot of people's attention. And I feel that it would be a substantive enough change that if it was going to be truly entertained, you need to do it in a public hearing by the body that is able to make a decision legislatively.
What if the contract, the HOA covenants and so forth and so on permit some latitude
Right.
In the contract with the residents? Does it then have to come back?
I think it goes, in my mind, it goes back to what the expectations of the people in the community are under their master plan.
And that would be in...
I'm sorry. So, for example, I know our HOA has a lot of community meetings with different things that are happening within the community as far as density, everything that's going on. So when you're talking in terms of community meetings, are you talking of having a public hearing for the entire county or just in that area?
No.
Or because there's a lot of stuff that goes on between the staff, the developer, the HOA, and there's a lot of moving parts that one can affect the other. And My only concern about adding another, and I understand what you're saying, my only concern about adding another layer is then that puts us in the mix of this negotiation potential that might be going on.
I think I understand your concern, and what I would say is I wouldn't intend for this to do that. What it would do is it would keep things essentially the same way they are right now. You deal with the homeowners associations, you deal with the developer, they come forth, they want to do a master plan change. He looks at it and says, okay, we may come to this conclusion that this is not a substantive change to the master plan. We can administratively approve it. Then you and I are never going to see it. It's just the way things are being done today. The only time we would see it would be if there is a disagreement between what the HOA was saying or the developer was saying and what Paul and the planning people were saying. And then they would say, all right, we have a disagreement now. Who's the final arbiter of that? I think the final arbiter of that should be us, because we have the ability to do it with a public hearing where the public can come and make comment about it. It will have in no way is intended to cut out the participation of the HOA. And the same kind of thing was going on in my HOA when they had this proposal for the rental apartments. There was a lot of meetings, a lot of conversation going on. There were conversations with staff. It all got resolved, and that was one of those that would never have come back to us because it all got resolved. But if it gets to the point where there is a disconnect, and there is a ruling that from the planning that it's not consistent, then that is the way to boot it back to us. And I doubt that would occur, but maybe once a year, if at most, maybe once every couple of years.
If I may, for clarification, Mr. Eisenhower, so we're talking unit type, unit location, unit number, right? Those three criteria. And then would the board, prefer to have those come to the board if it was kind of an appellate type deal where we had not?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
So essentially, I don't think we need to, if that comes to the planning and the planning commission and the planning department get together and they work with the developer and it's all works out, we don't need to see that. We don't need to see that. The only time I think that I would like to see it back at the board is when there is a disagreement
or some type of critical non-concurrence.
Exactly. Does that make sense to?
I don't know. How does everybody else feel?
I guess, again, I would just like to have a better sense of what we're talking about in terms of individual cases over time.
Before making a decision?
It still seems to me that there may be a county resident interest that is not accounted for in the process that we're talking about here. Whether it may be in terms of changing the types of units or the numbers of units because of the impact it may have on demand for services and the like. And so, my inclination is always to say, well, the board ought to decide things because that's, that stops here. But I guess I'm just a little bit unsure of the degree to which we might encounter issues that extend beyond the residents of a particular development and the developer of that property and so forth.
Doesn't that get into the significance, though, if we're talking about more traffic
and
or
maybe
more kids?
Maybe if I understood what significant was, I would be able to say that. And I understand the challenge in doing that, but I guess that's why I would want to take a look at what kinds of cases we're talking about, so that if I can get a sense of whether there are any kind of cut points that would make sense in terms of significance, it'd be something that would probably be easier for me to understand. Yeah, this is something that can all be handled in this process. It rises to the level of,
So you're looking for some sort of chart, basically, to go by. If it's this, then it's this. If it's this, then it's this, kind of.
Yeah, more than So I don't want to. I want to respect the discretion of the professionals in dealing with issues that are that don't rise above significance, but that means it's important to me to know where that line is.
Yes.
So
We're back to square one.
No, I'm following. Just one point of clarification on this one. When you mentioned the potential for the board to hear items where there is a disconnect or disagreement, typically we're at the staff level, we're going to be working directly with the developer, who usually has a design professional who's their representative applicant. And usually the developer through their applicant is either working with staff and or they're the ones making the presentation or making the request via the appeal to the DRC. That process, the way it's set up right now, and Mr. Haldeman can sort of chime in because the policy committee spent a lot of time off on the idea of either soliciting input or the significance of receiving input from parties who are not the developer, whether it be the HOA or individual citizens of a master plan community, by virtue of them raising an objection. I think there was discussion at the policy committee on if that would then be a trigger for something to bubble up to the board. So the idea of that, of understanding a bit more of your expectations there.
So as I was reading this, and again, I underlined this because it was something that I was unsure about. Looks to me as if, if the board is serving in an appellate function, things come to the board when the developer's proposal is denied.
Correct.
So if they're approved, the board doesn't play a role in it,
right.
And that means that they may be approved, but they may be approved over objections. And so I'm not really of the mind that it's an appellate role that we would play.
That the board would not play that.
That we would not just be an appellate body.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't
be more.
Like that, yeah.
Right. A determining body.
What would be those trigger
That's
points?
the Stonehouse example.
yeah, and that's where we got into the conversation about numbers. The case comes forward, we know the plan, we begin to hear feedback from the citizens in the community, whether they have an HOA. In most cases, they did in our examples. And then, we started talking about trigger numbers. And what would be the appropriate number of particular ounces of feedback to incline us toward desiring to push that up. That's not an answer, but that's the difficulty of figuring out what would be that tripwire.
Well, let me repeat back what I'm hearing as part of the conversation. You all can make sure I'm getting our notes correctly so that the policy committee has good direction. Definitely want to get back to you with a little bit more detail about what these 18 cases were. It sounds like if it's not a significant change based on the criteria, the current process of the developer working with the staff can continue. Those are the very minor types of changes.
I have no desire to sit and discuss shrubbery. Quite frankly,
be glad to have you either way.
I leave that to the professionals.
It sounds like, again, I want to make sure we're hearing if there's consensus that in the instance of proposed master plan changes that staff deems are significant and the developer appeals, that when those proposed changes involve a change in essentially the location of any residential dwelling units or the counts, moving units from one land bay to another internal to the project, or a change in type. Somebody doesn't want to do single family anymore. They want to do duplexes or townhomes. That appeal process would involve going to the DRC and then PC, and then would ultimately, the step would be added in, coming to the board for the board to have the final.
If it wasn't resolved before then.
That's where, that would be helpful to understand that. I was hearing two different answers.
Yeah.
If it's resolved, then why bring it to us?
Because if it's if it's not resolved in a way that we would like it to be resolved,
Then it may not be resolved.
then it may not be resolved.
Or you all may have a different.
And then it would
We
be
may have a different opinion of what it should be to resolve it.
Correct.
I think you don't know what it is, but you'll see it. You know it when you see it, right? You'll find too with the citizens, how did this happen?
Yeah.
That's their question. And I said, what happened? Well, the neighborhood got changed. We mean the neighborhood got changed. And then we're unaware of that change, but the neighbors know about it. Everybody else knows about it, but sometimes the board doesn't know about that change. And so you get caught off guard at the grocery store and say, hey, my neighborhood was set up to be X, and now it's changed, and this person or that person, whatever's in there, doing whatever they want. And I know they're not doing whatever they want, but it appears to be within the neighborhood that someone now has come in and I bought into this concept. And now all of a sudden that concept's gone. It's good in half the neighborhood, but now we've changed this portion. And now I'm in a neighborhood I really may not have gotten into if I knew that ahead of time. And I think that's the clutch that gets us is the citizens come back and say, what did y'all do?
What'd you do?
Now, do other neighborhoods with HOAs, do they not typically vote on change? Because I know mine does.
No, but ours had.
Yeah, if it's not the nuance, I believe, of Sadler is when they're finishing up and the developer's still involved. Yeah. Oftentimes that football hasn't been handed over to the HOA.
See, that was when we were working our way from developer control to HOA control. A lot of these things occurred in that time frame, and the HOA and the residents didn't have any say in that process unless it went to the Board of Supervisors.
Because I know we vote on everything.
Yeah.
And Paul, just a point of clarification. There are these categories of factors where we're sort of looking at when it rises above the significant line. One thing that I didn't see there, even though the code section, the ordinance says that there would, you'd submit a new community impact statement, right?
So, I mean, that's part of the question. We'll have to figure it out. That's sort of a next level of detail is when it bubbles up to you all. Is it one part of an advertised public hearing, or is it like the DRC where it's in a work session format?
Yeah.
And then sort of what would the expectation be about is the consistency request that bubbles up to the board, what submittal requirements, what comes along with it? Are those the same requirements as if it was a new application or a formal amendment, or would it be something else? Those would be helpful details to know.
Because again, it would seem to me that something where there is, wherever you draw that line of significance, if there's a significant impact on the community caused by the proposed amendment, that's not currently listed as a factor that would be taken into account, right? I mean, you could. I mean, you can sort of, by implication, suggest, well, if you're changing the kind of units that are there, maybe that's going to have that impact. But it's not explicitly saying that if it's this change.
I think that would be articulated in what the policy committee would bring forward. Are those pieces?
Right.
Yeah, and would be an extension of sort of that change of character of land use. It better be defined as a change in residential location counts. We'd work on the details to match your expectations.
Well, not to confuse it, one thing Paul asked is sort of that when his decision is, hey, this is significant, and the developer disagrees, where does it go? And maybe the place it goes, because we didn't really answer that yet, but maybe it goes to the Planning Commission or Development DRC as it should. If they agree with staff, then the next level of appeal would be the board, I guess. Paul, looking at Paul as a yes or no.
I'm hearing that it wouldn't be an appeal from the commission. It would be both. It would flow through the commission onto the board.
If the commission says no, is that the final? There's not a change? Or if the commission disagrees with staff, maybe that comes as a recommendation to the board from the commission that the recommendation
I'm out.
I think it would be open-ended. So, for example, if the DRC looks at it and the full planning commission looks at it and we approve it, it's not significant, it's approvable, that's a word. And then that comes to you. Or if we deny it outright, either way, you would have the purview to either include it into your consent agenda if you deemed it non-controversial, or you would have the ability to either pull it or put it in your regular agenda to consider. And that would have a lot to do with the amount of feedback that you're getting either from the community or the developer or the community, the county citizens, as you mentioned. That's how it would flow in my mind.
Really, under
The
either
only challenge
scenario, it would reach the board.
The challenge I'd find with that is simply that, if we can't tell citizens this is the process it's going to take, it becomes really a problem. And so,
And would there be a
worried about that.
grandfather clause on a neighborhood that
Exactly.
has been there to a certain point, then they want to change something. They haven't finished out, they want to change something. And it's a significant change. Is that then become a new applicant? Or does that then become the old applicant that wants to make changes? Because by that time frame, everything has changed within our community.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
do
it's
we
really
look at
there really is not a grandfathering to where some master plan communities this wouldn't apply to, and some others it would. It would be all of them. Whether it's a Ford's Colony with a much older, well-established master plan, or the new thing that got approved, it would apply equally. It's when those site plans and subdivisions start rolling in,
Right.
is when this process kicks in. And, it may be, again, our sort of the starting point is, by definition, any change in location counts or type is automatically deemed significant and would roll into that process. That wouldn't be an avenue where that would be a non-significant staff-only decision. Mm-hmm. So that, just by definition, those would roll up to the PCN board.
And I guess that's where we are, is unfortunately not coming to you with more quantifiable metrics. And
it's hard to do.
It really is.
It is. It's very difficult to do, and I'm not sure that it's, with all due respect to John, I'm not sure it's beneficial, because our system has been working, I think, reasonably well. My concern with it was that there are going to be a couple of places here and there where there will be some contention, and the ability for our citizens to weigh in a public environment is what our system lacks right now. And I'd like to try to get to that, but I'd like to try to keep it as simple as possible. I really don't want to build a very complicated system.
You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You just want to tweak it a little bit.
Just tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, the challenge to me is though that we're a public body that represents the entire county, and we seem like we're dealing with almost two different perceptions of this issue. One of which is basically we've got the residents and the developer, and if they can work things out, that's fine. But that's not really enough for us. We have to at least be open to anybody in the community who has a concern or an issue they'd like to bring forward about this. So that's just.
Then you have to figure out how do you weigh that too, because if somebody that lives, and I get understanding that there is school and road and all of that issues, but then how far do you reach into somebody's private HOA issue that they've been able to work amongst their set?
Well, look at we had a case. It's in court right now. Where there were a lot of people who didn't live in the community where the master plan
You're right.
would be involved, right? And where there was, an incentive within the community to take one action, at least by the board.
You're right.
Right? And
And then you got to think too is as you change, if you're adding more to one area, what does that do to your traffic?
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be our next biggest issue we're going to have to attack is traffic. because
It's here.
It is
Trying to get to the Hinkle building.
And I think that
I've been here quicker.
we have the perspective of the larger look. That a lot of time, if you're looking at it from you're looking here when we know the impact on everything else. So
yeah, I mean,
but there's
I certainly respect the fact that this has been a challenge to deal with.
It's for us as well.
Yeah. But I think I think in some ways having a look at some of this information is going to reassure me in terms of well, what are we talking about here, and can I understand in practice what seems to rise to the level of significance.
I think the policy committee spent another half a day on the quantitative piece and quickly realized that 10% of a 20-lot master plan is a very different result than 10% of a Ford's Colony or Stone House. And so putting a number to some of this stuff, I think they all quickly realized that they're never going to be able to get that one right. So.
Or even a percentage with the flexibility required perhaps in the future, 20 years in the future for a developer. The market forces have changed. Do you want to make that a limiting factor?
We also kind of came up with the thought that, and this comes from the comp plan, one of the goals of the comp plan is to encourage ordinances that will or develop ordinances that will encourage clustering, more open space. And this isn't in the goals, but perhaps even lower density, lower total numbers. And here you get into the same problem or the same issue internal to the HOA versus the impact on the broader community. It may be good for one and not good for the other. But if a developer, such as Stonehouse, wants to redesign its master plan in such a way that creates more open space and possibly fewer total homes, should we have some way to make it easier and cheaper for them to do it? Fewer requirements, fewer fees, that sort of thing. That's, of course, in doing that, assuming it's not a violation of the HOA contract, you can impact negatively the people who already live there, raise their HOA fees or cut back on their amenities or what have you, while having a beneficial impact on the broader community in terms of less traffic, so forth, less demands on the infrastructure. Is that something you want us to wrestle with, or?
That's that option 3 that's enumerated in your staff report. And whether it's as part of a cluster development proper master plan, or in the instance of master plans where they're proposing to move numbers around, does the board want to see those changes if the numbers go up and down?
Yeah.
Or just up?
I'll chime in on that because when I first came back on the board and they were talking about the potential for some of that land up there going into conservation easement and significantly reducing the footprint of that community, that's a substantive change. And whether it's one way or the other, it's a substantive change. And I think that it is something that the board needs to weigh in on in a public environment, because it may, like you say, it may negatively impact some of the folks in the community. We need to hear from them about that. But then we also have to look at it from the greater perspective of the community. What does this do to our demand for potentially for schools, effect on transportation, water demand? So I think that's something that I would really think, regardless of which way you went, would have to come back to us as being a substantive change.
And then you got to think too with clustering, and I'm all for clustering, but I'm against it in another way because it eats up our rural lands. So if you can go in there on a piece of rural land and get clustering, all of a sudden now you're able to sell that a whole lot better to the community or to the public that's buying it than you would a 3-acre lot. But then what that does is that kills our rural areas. It gives us that green space, but usually that's a space that's back behind there where nobody can get to anyhow. And so then that really will speed up developing of our rural lands, which is one of the things that most of the citizens I hear from want to try to protect are those rural areas. And yeah, they know they're going to get developed over time, but they don't want to be developed too quickly and do the cluster where they can cluster up and nothing against the developers or anything, but if I can build something right here in a cluster, it's a lot cheaper for me than to build all the way down at the end. So, it's a win-win there. And yeah, the clustering saves the other green space, which I love saving the green space too. So it's fitting those within what we're trying to keep within the PSA and not letting that part of the tools out of the tool bag that end up ruining our rural lands at the same time, and trying to have that balance between the two of them, because I can see where in neighborhoods, I want to change something, I want to cluster, and the neighborhood's fine with it, and we get more green space, and they love that. I'm all for it, but I'm looking all too with Sue and I having the biggest rural lands area, those clusterings getting out into the rural lands, and next thing you know, they're clustering and say, we're doing what you want. Well, yes, but that wasn't really our intent, where our intent is to try to save as much rural lands as possible to keep the community character what it is today. Does that make sense?
I think I understand. If you were to put a nuance to it, it would be specific, incentives to clustering within PSA, et cetera, et cetera. Then we get into the PSA discussion.
Yeah. And then, and that's and down in Virginia Beach, they do the same thing, but they have the Greenway or Greenbelt or, and that seems to work down there with keeping a balance between the farms and the rural folks and the people that want more urban type living. So it kind of balances the community out. That's, I think, what we're trying to do is balance that, not stifle anything, but try to find that balance that fits everybody that lives within our community. And it's tough.
It's not easy to do.
It is.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarification on the second paragraph in that option 3, special consideration for cluster development? It talks about streamlining the process for master planning when you're reducing the number of units, right?
For master plan consistency.
Yes, right. Yes, right.
Or on the initial.
So, what's so cumbersome about the process now? I mean, when we're talking about streamlining something,
if
it suggests that there's a problem with it.
If the change is significant, which, however we define that, then it does have to go back through the master plan amendment process, and that can require new reports and
okay. So that would if you're reducing the number of units, then you get to skip that.
That was a question, yes, but
right. Okay, that's just what I was trying to find out. I mean, I assume that.
Right, that is where the wording came from to convey that in fact you were minimizing the amount of delayed administrivia associated with gearing towards something as an incentive.
Would you like us to craft whatever we come up with to make it easier to go in that direction than it is to go in the direction of more units, or
I see.
That sort of thing? Easier and cheaper, fewer fees. That's
right. Okay, that explains.
Well, I appreciate this. Appreciate the feedback on the master plan consistency. So if the board didn't have any other questions or concerns on that, we could move on to the second issue.
Okay.
Again, also at its May 22nd work session, the Board of Supervisors expressed interest in examining and discussing regulations to protect the drinking water supply in areas of public health and water quality sensitivity. And on November 13th, the board adopted the corresponding initiating resolution. Examples of regulations in adjacent localities that address these issues are the Reservoir Protection Ordinance in Newport News and the Watershed Management and Protection Overlay District in York County. Staff from Community Development and the County Attorney's Office have identified 3 potential avenues for implementation. Option 1 would be to add a new section in the special regulations portion of the zoning ordinance. Special regulations represent a text amendment in the zoning ordinance. Option 2 would be to create an overlay district within the zoning ordinance. Overlay districts are a change in the zoning map and would represent the rezoning of a piece of property. And option 3 would be to create a new chapter of the county code that regulates the use of and development of property around reservoirs and public water supplies within the county. So under that scenario, it would conceivably be something other than the zoning or subdivision ordinances. The Policy Committee has not yet discussed this item. These are such high-level and divergent options that having some board direction at the outset can help best help staff and the Policy Committee meet expectations and pick which path to head down.
The question I had, and it seems that the number 2 option of the overlay district, if I read this correctly, would require us to rezone all of the parcels in that overlay district.
Correct. That's what that
which
means.
Seems to be a rather onerous, difficult process. So as a result of that, I wasn't really in favor of that, but either one of the other 2 looked like they would be a very reasonable way to go. Is there any advantage of option 1 and option 3, any advantage or disadvantage one over the other that you could highlight for us?
I think at a high level, option 1 in the zoning ordinance gives you the benefit of picking stuff up at the time of development. And also, there's a known process through which the zoning ordinance is enforced. Option 3, which is more sort of what Newport News does, it looks to us to be that's administered by their engineering department. When you do a separate standalone chapter in the county code, you have to come up with its own set of implementation and enforcement and how you administer those. So that would sort of be all new from scratch. So there are some unknowns with that. We'd sort of have to think about, what county department does that, picks that up, make sure it's enforced, et cetera, versus, again, option 1 that gets picked up as part of a site plan or subdivision review.
But option 1 would still give us the ability to effectively do what we need to do with this.
Yeah, and I'd say I'd certainly rule out option 2. I just think it's too cumbersome and burdensome to try to do that and to guess where we might want to have such an overlay district as we pursue a future water supply. I think number 1 is probably the best of the options. And just as a sort of an addendum to this, in some of the discussion, there's a kind of conflation of the protection of the water supply with water quality. And my sense is that you're really pointing out that Chesapeake Bay ordinances really are directed toward protecting the water quality to a greater degree, and that if we want to make additional changes to protect water quality, that's probably a good place to, or in the environmental regulations. But that in this particular case, this was an issue that we had not really ever addressed in our requirements previously.
Right. There's probably some subtle distinctions between protecting the natural waterways versus protecting drinking water reservoirs.
Right.
Correct. The existing regs and the pollution prevention plans in the existing Chesapeake Bay are more towards protecting water quality in natural water bodies.
Right. Right. So I think that this can be, just to keep it focused on the water supply. It's probably what I would have intended.
Are you okay with option 1?
I am.
Well, I think what we're looking for is our water quality as far as the drinking water, and that's why we're possibly and what could possibly move in next to it and protect the nose. Our waterways are protected pretty well. I just don't want to get overbearing, and all of a sudden now somebody has a house on the water, can't even water the grass. We've got to be careful that we don't, I think what we're intending, if y'all tell me if I'm wrong, what we're intending to do is maybe a service station moving in next to a reservoir or next to a water source. And we're worried that, I know there's a lot of regulations and all that in place that keeps all that from happening, but we're worried about that water. And it's very valuable. And of course, we don't want a service station moving out on the James River either, but I think it's more of the drinking water and the quality of our drinking water than, and the waterways are pretty well protected, and our setbacks and that sort of thing are pretty well in place with all that. And am I correct, y'all? That's what I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what really triggered the concern was that when we recognized that we don't really have anything that specifically says, well, you have to have a buffer or some kind of protection against the potential intrusion of gasoline or other toxic substances into your drinking water supply.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, it helps a great deal. And all we have remaining is upcoming legislative or ordinance amendments due to General Assembly actions.
We do. We've got 3. So fortunately, you don't have to make any choices on these. Unfortunately, we also have to just kind of do them anyway. Just a little bit of a preview. A couple of years ago, the board adopted some ordinance requirements requiring the review of enhanced conceptual plans. This past session, the General Assembly says we can't do that anymore, so unfortunately we have to unwind that ordinance amendment. We've currently advertised that for public hearing with the Planning Commission in December, and then it would move up to the board. We also have one involving the Board of Zoning Appeals. We'll need to update our zoning ordinance to be consistent, and that's really providing the BZA the ability to grant a reasonable modification of property when requested by or on behalf of a person with a disability. And finally, the General Assembly also put into place changes on how a local zoning ordinance may treat applications for wireless communication facilities. They're following a bit some of the changes at the federal level with the FCC and their decisions regarding the facilities intended to support the deployment of 5G technology. Continues to effectively remove local zoning authority, especially when it comes to shorter new towers and co-locations on existing structures. Again, James City County will need to be consistent with the state code, and that one's going to be a little bit more complicated to think through, so we'll begin those discussions with the policy committee in the next couple of months.
So have we communicated with other localities about how they're reacting to these changes in the state code?
Yeah.
And do we have any, anybody got any good ideas?
No. Some of the, I was sharing with Mr. Stevens, some of the other localities that are a little bit further ahead are those ones that are in control of their rights of way, because these, there needs to be so many more of these antennas with such more frequency. Everybody right now thinks there'll be a propensity for those to be located in the right of way on existing power poles, light poles, what have you. And so, those localities who control their right-of-way through public works or what have you are wanting to try to get ahead of that a little bit. I think the city of Williamsburg, and especially with their historic sensitivity, has recently completed some revisions for ones that are proposed within their right-of-way.
Did they get some kind of an exemption?
No, just as a city, they're in control of their ability to do that.
I thought we'd heard something about legislation relating to towers that exempted them from.
I would think almost they need to be to protect the character of some of the area in there.
Well, we're older than they are.
Just call it a colonial cell tower.
Yeah, right. There's a couple in the church towers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So
Well, they can put those up in Lenexa. That would be a great help for Cox's inability to get up there.
That's all we have for you today.
All right.
And thank you very much for your time today. It really is very, very helpful to get your guidance. And, if there's anything else, as always, I and my colleagues are wide open to any guidance. And thanks to Paul and his staff, they definitely have helped us put together not an overly aggressive agenda, but certainly enough to keep our hands full.
Now, was there one other question for all the proffers we have that we used to have? Now,
we still got a lot of them.
Yes. Is the ones we're missing? Is there a way to put those into ordinances?
No, I mean, a lot of the ones like off-site road impacts and those types of things, we don't have those tools now.
But haven't we started to do some things like put into ordinances? Things like the consistency with the archaeological.
Oh, everything. The archaeological ones, yes, natural resource, sidewalks.
Those are going into ordinances.
Yeah, bike paths, a lot of those things. A lot of those pieces. Schools, in terms of the cash.
The money now.
Couldn't hold on.
Anything that was cash related or impact fee related, we don't.
But we're working on that with the General Assembly. Yeah. Hopefully.
All right, thank y'all very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks for
Appreciate
consulting
it.
with us.
Indeed.
That brings us to a recycling update. It's Grace.
Grace ought to be close.
Okay.
We talked today. If she's not, I know enough.
I saw her.
She's out there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hello.
Told you I wouldn't miss it.
Hi, Steve.
Thank you for being with us.
So, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Grace Boomer, the Director of General Services, and along with me today is Steve Geisler. He's the Executive Director of the Virginia Peninsula's Public Service Authority. During last month's work session, I had communicated that James City County, along with other participating jurisdictions, were reviewing the curbside recycling RFPs. Mr. Geisler and I are here today to provide you with an update on the curbside recycling program and to provide some options to our program. And please note that during this evening's discussion, we will be providing approximate cost figures as we are still reviewing contract proposals and are unable to provide exact numbers. So the Virginia Peninsula's Public Service Authority has been providing curbside recycling service to the following jurisdictions: James City County, Poquoson, the City of Williamsburg, and York County through regional contracts since 1991. Our current contract with County Waste expires June 30th, 2019. Our current program serves approximately 25,115 households. It is funded solely by the general fund at a FY19 budget amount of $535,767 at a cost of $158 per household per month. In January, China put a ban on the import of mixed paper and other recyclables, which has had a significant impact on recycling throughout the United States and beyond. Staff from General Services, along with other participating jurisdictions, have reviewed RFPs and met with representatives from VIPSA. And the total cost for the program for FY20 is expected to be approximately $1.8 million, or approximately $6 per household per month. We wanted to remind folks of the acceptable curbside materials: plastic bottles, jugs, and food containers, cardboard and mixed paper, rigid plastics, metal cans, glass bottles, and jars. Due to the significant cost increase, we've included some options with the benefits and challenges for your consideration. So the first option is for James City County to cover the increase through the general fund. The benefits of that would be there's no changes to the operation. We continue to provide a very popular service used by our residents. There'd be no impact to recycling rate mandate. The challenge is, how do we fund it? So, we're currently at a $1.58 per household, and we'll be moving to approximately $6 per household. The second option is to create a hybrid program, which is sharing the cost with our citizens. This would also, the benefit would also continue, would continue the program that we have, the popular program that we have, and contract administration would be provided through VIPSA. The challenge is recycling may be greatly reduced, and a reduction in James City County's contribution to the regional state mandate of 25%. Also, program administration and billing. How do we bill the customers for this service? It will increase our solid waste costs at our convenience centers. Will increase the use of convenience centers, creating additional traffic counts on Jolly Pond and requiring additional staff for operations and transport. We would need to increase citizen education, and with this hybrid program, possibly guarantee minimum household counts. Saying we guarantee 10, 15, 20,000 for the contract. The last option is to suspend the program while staff explores additional recycling service options and waste minimization strategies. The benefit would be a significant reduction to the cost, county cost. It would, allow us that time to really dig into some options and provide you with some, further things to think about. The challenges will be, again, recycling may be greatly reduced. The increase to our solid waste costs, the convenience centers would require expanded operations. The increase to convenience centers, again, traffic counts, additional operational costs, and again, increase to citizen education and outreach. And then the residents would contract directly with a hauler at most likely a higher rate. So, those are the options we have so far. We continue to, look at other options and educate ourselves on what else is out there.
So help me out. I don't know why the increased traffic. Are we now taking the recycling to our own? Because our recycling gets picked up now by who we're contracted with, and where does it go?
It is hauled to the material recovery facility in Chesterfield.
So not here in the county. So you're talking about an increased traffic on Jolly Pond, and so I'm trying to marry the two.
If we're not
more trash.
Yeah.
People would have more trash.
Will allow more trash, or you will be dropping the recyclables off at the convenience centers.
Yourself.
Okay. In Grace City, we have a community that likes to recycle. I think our rate is 70% of people are participating, which really, Steve pointed out, is probably higher, because if I don't put my card out this week, I'm not counted, but I'm still participating. Maybe I just wasn't home. I put it out, once a month. I'm still participating. So I think we do have a very high percentage of people that recycle. I think Grace is right. If we suspend it, there are going to be some people that are going to still carry to our convenience centers and more than today. And so we do believe you'll have increased traffic, not only in trash kind of volume, but you'll have it in the recycling that's being dropped off at our convenience centers.
So the hybrid program, would somebody come pick it up at our houses?
Yeah. I think what we were suggesting with the hybrid is make it a program where people can pay some amount if they want to recycle, but not require everybody that's currently recycling to pay. I mean, you could figure out how to pass on 100% of the cost to the residents and force it, But I think you'll have as many people unhappy with that as you have unhappy if you quit it, suspend the program. Because there are people on both sides of recycling, and I do think you have people in a habit of recycling. I think a lot of people want to recycle. 70% of the folks in our community today that have access to it are doing it. So the other option, I mean, there's some other options. You could force the cost. That first option of continuing, you could not pay for it out of the general fund. You could have a monthly fee that everybody pays their own cost. But then you're going to have those that would say, well, I'm not recycling. Why do I have to pay? And you'll have a pretty big group that's unhappy with us. So we were trying to have that hybrid that said, hey, for the bidder to be of interest and still be part of IPSA, which I think is a benefit to James City County as well as the other 4 local governments that are part of that. If we're in it and we guarantee some minimum purchase, whether it's 10 or 15,000, I think we'll have that many residents sign up to want to participate at a reasonable cost, whatever that is.
Going with the hybrid. Is that's the one you were describing was the hybrid?
It is. I mean, the hybrid one is if our cost is $6 a month, maybe you have a fee that's $3 or $4 to the resident, and the county still pays approximately $2, maybe. But the guarantee would be we're going to pay for 10,000 customers whether they use it or not. That's our risk.
So what are the other localities doing? Do you know? Have they talked about it or maybe?
Steve, if I'm wrong, help me. But Williamsburg said they were probably going to just do it like they were, and they're not charging a separate fee for solid waste. Pocosin and York, both are charging solid waste and water fees. So if they're charging folks a bill, they're going to increase that sum that will cover most of the cost. Maybe not 100%, but some. Is that? Yeah.
If I go back to this, when you say Pocosin is charging solid waste in York, because they actually they collect garbage.
Yes.
Which was, when I was on the board previously, John and I can remember, there was a proposal that we do the same, that we basically, in other words, we don't create our own sanitation group, but we contract it.
Correct. So
that we have a county pickup of trash countywide under a contract, and that if we did that, we would have guaranteed enough participation that they would be able to throw in the recycling part of it literally for free, is what they were saying last time. It was rejected because folks just said, well, we didn't want to be making those kind of decisions. Well, let me tell you, the price that was being quoted was a lot less than the best I'm getting right now through my HOA. So I always thought it was a pretty reasonable option, but I don't know whether that's still on the table.
And let me also point out that this came up with the storm debris pickup because it was York County's doing it for free. Well, York County isn't doing it for free, but because they have garbage pickup, they are able to then add this when they do your storm debris pickup, because they're taking it out of the money that you're already paying for your garbage pickup. So,
and Mr. Drysdale, the Grace and I did talk about it. Mr. Glenn had pointed that out. I think that's a discussion for the board. If you want us to, I think the numbers would still be reasonable. That would make sense for us to administer some type of solid waste disposal that could be a monthly cost. I think it would become cheaper. I think you do have some smaller providers that then may or may not make it. I think that was the concern before. I think the significant difference in the recycling world is the market for recyclables used to almost cover their cost, or you might make a little money, and probably during that discussion, I'll throw it in because my cost of collecting it, I'm going to get back in the selling of the materials. I don't think that economy exists, so I don't think your recycling would be free, but I think your cost for service, if it's $20 or $25 a month, if we had a larger contract, might be 15 or 18 versus a 20 or 25. So I do think your solid waste piece would be maybe less cost to a resident. But for me, that's a bigger discussion and something that the recycling one is pretty imminent. If you don't make a decision pretty soon or give us some direction, we didn't come with all the details or a really hard push. But if you say, no, we don't want to charge residents anything, then that eliminates the hybrid. It's either all back to the general fund or we don't do it. And if you're, hey, we don't think people should pay it all, then those are the kinds of high-level discussions we needed from you so we could get back into where do we go. Because the RFP that's out that Steve's evaluating, we probably need a recommendation to sign an agreement with them in the January timeframe so that they can enter into a contract.
And we're considering new contractor, and if we go with a new contractor, the big issue is they need to order trucks. The contract expires June 2019. So six months is actually a short period lead time for ordering trucks.
Yeah.
So, I'm really pushing it by going to January. So our intent is to wrap up, first of all, our agreement with the contractor, and then we'll present a service agreement between the VIPSA board and the county, hopefully at your January meeting, one of your January meetings.
So for me, it's not that I don't want to pay for recycling. That's a big bump, $6 a household. That's a lot. That's going to mean that something else is going to have to not go through in our budget. That's just the simple fact. Mm-hmm. So I personally would pay $10 a month to do my recycling, but I have one other question. I think I'm not going to hold myself to one, but are we going to be assured that the recycled materials are going to be truly recycled? Because I've seen things now where because of the cost, it's just going in the trash. And so I don't want to put on a dog and pony show that we're really doing recycling, but we're not recycling.
Yeah, we have, and we have, there are markets, there are really good markets for things like the plastic bottles and jugs, the aluminum cans. We have asked the contractors to provide us with information about their markets. They are able to sell the materials. One of the big issues is that they're not able to sell them at the prices that they were before China implemented their national sword. And that has had a significant impact on markets everywhere. And the largest hit has been in the mixed paper market. And mixed paper is a large percentage of what we put in our recycling bins. Mm-hmm. So the companies that collect, process, and sell the recyclables are receiving much less money than they used to for the sale of mixed paper.
So did we consider, or would we consider not doing mixed paper, just doing aluminum and plastic?
Do waste paper. Well, there's still money to be made for them in mixed paper. It's just that they're not making
what they were.
Instead of making this much, they're now making this much.
Okay.
And Ms. Larson, I think the same applies to glass. It's one of those things that's very recyclable, but the market's, there's not a whole lot of financial side on the product. It sells, or there's a use for it, but your cost to collect it, you're not recovering. And I think we would still say you have people in the habit of doing that. I think the markets over time will ebb and flow, and so it's a shame you can't take big groups and get them in the habit, out of the habit, in the habit, and out of the habit. That becomes very challenging. So the recommendation from all the communities has been to stick with paper and glass, just because they are recyclable. You've had people, I experienced in Goldsboro, we took out glass, and you wouldn't believe the amount of people who were livid that we're not taking glass. And it's just one of those, they made the decision in Goldsboro for that very reason. Hey, if we're not getting money for it, we're not going to take it. But I still think that's not the best choice because it's still an unpredictable market. And I think there will be a use for that material. I do think, to your point, is it being recyclable? It's recycled. It will be. Steve's got to follow it to make sure of those things. But I think the market is going to ebb and flow, and it's apt to come back. And then get people back in the habit of it is challenging too.
And if you do take it out of the thing, like you said, then it definitely winds up in the
landfill. So one other, I noticed in my neighborhood a lot, there'll be the big tub, and then there's some people that are still using, that buy their big tub, they put the old green, so somebody's got to get out and. Which does that add?
That's a great question, and that's a great issue. Our current contractor, County Waste, their stated policy is that they will pick it up, and in our contract it says they will pick up the material even if it's next to the cart. We encourage everyone to place materials in the cart, because it's so much more productive and efficient
for the driver to just go and pick up the cart and dump it and then move on to the next home.
Yeah.
If that cart, if there's a little bin outside, he has to dump it, he gets out. It does that additional, the contractor tells us that additional time does not have a significant impact on their cost.
Okay.
I know there are a number of recycling contractors who will refuse to collect anything outside of the cart.
So moving forward, if we do a new contract, there may not be any more additional. It's going to be what's in your tub, and that's it.
Right. I don't know that.
I'm just saying, maybe.
Yeah. One of the carts that were initially distributed 5 years ago were all 65-gallon carts.
Yeah.
We have 95-gallon carts, and so when somebody calls our office and says they didn't pick up my bin on next to it, we tell them, look, I got a deal for you. How about we give you a bigger cart and fit everything inside, and everybody will be happy.
Yeah.
The larger carts eliminate a lot of that problem of placing things outside.
Okay.
So can we get a little bit more detail on the numbers we're dealing with here? So it's $1.58 per household. Is that based on the number of households that are being picked up, or the number of households in the county that are served?
The number of households that have carts.
That have carts. Okay, so not everybody has a cart.
That's correct.
Right, and we think about 70%.
No, about 70%. One of the things we do is we require the contractor to track what we call set-out rate.
Okay.
So on any given week, the set-out rate in James City County is 70%.
So it's more like 85 or 90.
So we know that it's probably, there's a larger number. Whatever number that is, we don't know. But we know it's probably 80, maybe 85% of the homes in the county are actually participating in the program.
So when we say $1.58, are we talking about whether or not you are participating in the program?
It's if you have a cart.
Right.
So it's the ones participating.
And this is only the carts. The 85, 90% is just the ones with the cart, not countywide.
When we talked about $6, that's based on the assumption of the same number.
The $6 is the $6 number. There are a number of different costs that go into it. There is the collection cost. We're also we do advertising and printing, and that's a fee that we add to the county's cost. In addition, we have an administrative fee that we include to pay for our rent for our office and to keep us afloat. And that total sums up to approximately $6 per household per month.
But that's based on $6 per household that has a cart.
Correct.
Okay.
Roughly
So
25,000.
if the price went up and a bunch of people said, I don't want to participate, the price wouldn't cover it.
The price would come down. Yeah.
So what we've said is that if we got into something of guaranteeing that minimum purchase, the contractor, we believe, would honor our $6. And so instead of basing that on 25,000 customers, it'd be based on 10,000 or 15.
Okay.
But you'd guarantee a number. So if you had nobody if you came up with a hybrid program and you're going to charge people $3 or $4 a month and nobody participated, you'd still be on the hook. If your base was 10,000, you'd be on the hook for $6 a month for no service.
But that $6 a month is there. We haven't figured in we got to figure out how to bill or how we're going to work this. So we haven't figured in our administrative costs to that $6 a month.
We have not.
So we may be more looking at $7 a month.
You might. Those are some details that we didn't want to get in the middle of because that's some work if you had zero interest in that. If you have some interest in that, Grace has done some preliminary discussions. I think we can get there, but again, it will be some cost to do that.
But if that, I don't think that the 1.8 million should come out of the general fund. That should be a cost to whoever's using the service.
That's what we were trying to see if that's where the board felt that way.
Okay. Except that we have been spending $550,000 $53,000 a year already.
General fund.
So is it the whole 1.8 million, or is it 1.8 minus what we've been spending?
We could do a budget on, we spend this now.
Right.
And, and have that as a line item budget. I don't see increasing it.
Right.
That because the citizens in Meyer, the rural area, can't recycle because nobody's picking them up. You're either taking it to dump or you'll have a small carrier taking it, and they're not doing recycling. So you're limited. Nobody's going to come all the way down to my place to pick up 3 bottles, 2 cans, and some newspaper.
They don't do, it's not countywide?
It's almost.
No, they won't.
It's not.
They follow Cox.
No, I was going to say Cox.
I just use Cox because they don't supply service all over the county.
Steve, do you know how many households were not?
They just made a decision not to supply for another year.
No, 5 or 10,000.
I'll never get it.
I don't think it's that big.
Okay.
I don't think it's that big.
Okay.
It's
But
25,000 households. We can get you the number, but there are some areas that are not being provided that service, and it's, I'm sure, a density requirement, a service
Okay.
issue.
All right.
And it's a shame that it costs to recycle because that should be something
You get a discount for.
because you're trying to keep stuff from going to landfill. That's what's crazy about the whole thing. It drives me nuts that it costs to recycle. Then that would make people go, I'm just throwing it away.
Yeah.
I'm not getting another bin, throw it in the trash, let's move on.
But there's a bigger cost to that.
Yeah, but it's not to that citizen.
Right. Well.
But in the long run, it is to our children.
Yes.
And that's what we should be looking at as far as there should be a way to come together, all the jurisdictions come together tighter to try to figure out a way to bring the cost of recycling into a little tighter, because I know all of us want to recycle, and because we don't see our landfills fill up. Go down and look at the Newport News right now. They got Mount Trashmore growing right next to the interstate, and it's a wonderful smell when you go by there. But we don't want that, and recycling cuts some of that down. But it should be a way. I don't know if it's a way to. If we had more people recycling, the cost would come down.
It's hard to get more.
It would go up.
Our cost is our cost per household that recycles.
Yep.
I think if you went from, I don't know, where there are 50,000 households or 80,000 households into the VIPs, if that turned into 300,000 because you have more density, then your cost to collect it would probably go down. But 5,000 doesn't matter. It's not 5,000 is not going to make it better or worse. It's going to be a much bigger order of magnitude that makes the efficiency of picking it up better. That's where your cost, I guess, goes down. The material has some value, but you still have a significant cost to get it.
We're losing money in every sale, but we'll make it up in volume.
Yeah.
So can we do? Should we do a straw poll to see where everybody is, so that you can come back with more information?
Yeah, and to Mr. McGlinden's point, Grace and I weren't necessarily trying to reduce that $500,000 the county is spending on recycling. We were just trying to mitigate the additional 1.3 million cost, and by doing that would pass that on to, I don't know how else to do except pass it on to the residents that want it. That was that hybrid one. And so if that's where the board generally is, then that's where Grace and I would spend some more information and come back in the next month.
And I think that I haven't really thought this out fully, but a principle that we could look at in those terms is we're providing a service that we think is beneficial to the community. And therefore, the county is helping to reduce some of that cost of the service, just like we do with parks and recreation programs. They don't cover the fees that are charged, don't cover the full cost of participating in the rec programs and the like.
And you're making it optional versus mandatory. I mean, the other option that we didn't talk too hard, you could charge all 25,000 households the $3 or $4 to cover that increase. But then I think you'll have I think a lot of people will choose to do it voluntarily for $3 or $4 a month, because I think people get passionate about it and want to do it. But if you require everybody to, I think that other 10 or 20% will be very vocal and unhappy with us. And for some, it might be a financial hardship.
I think you're going to have to stand some of the increase in the general fund. In other words, it's $1.58 to $6. I don't think you can take $4.50, and say, all right, we're just going to put the $1.58 out of general fund and charge $4.50 for everybody else. I think we need to try to split the baby a little bit more so that you come up with a nice round figure that's reasonable for folks, $3 a month, 2.5 or 3.5, whatever that figure is, to do it. And I
don't know that I'm there.
I'm not either, because I'm paying for somebody else to do that, and I know my citizens on the other end of the county are going to be like, "Really, dude?
I know.
What are you doing now?"
Well,
I can understand what we're doing now, as far as what we've got in place now, and working from that, but adding more to that. I know the citizens in my zone would be like,
Mine too.
I'm more concerned about, we haven't even gotten to the administrative cost on our end yet. So before I say, okay, yeah, I'll pick up, you pay $3 a month. If you come back to me and Grace says, well, you know what, it's going to be additional $2 per household for me to collect $3 a month. That's I'm all about I've got the big can for the record, and I fill it up. I don't want this coming out, but the administrative side, not knowing that yet is worrisome to me. So before I commit to what I'm willing to pay out of the general fund, I really want to know that.
And I think where we need it tonight is, one, do you want us to continue recycling? And it sounds like the board thinks we ought to continue to recycle. So that was one. And two, it sounds like it's okay with some idea of the sharing of the cost. Just not sure what that amount would be yet. And again, whether that's $250 or $3 or $350 a month, I don't know, because I'm like you, we've got to get more details so we can really give you numbers. But is that a general direction for us to go, that in a month or so, and I hope we'll have information for you sooner, that we can say, here's what we're seeing, and then make a decision based on that.
And this might be terrible to say, but it'll be good for the numbers. This is what it's going to cost us to recycle. If I take that recycled product and throw it in the trash, what's it going to cost?
You have tonnages for us,
and then that way I know if we're saying it's going to cost us $6 to recycle it, but $2 to throw it away. I know it's terrible. But
we'd at least know tonnage for the county that's being recycled. Right. Then what I don't know is, with all the private haulers, we could say the community as a whole is paying more. We don't recycle, you're going to have this tonnage, and this is the disposal fee. We probably can get that number, but you may be paying it through an HOA versus individually. That'll be the unknown, because there are enough smaller groups that are paying for their own solid waste piece.
Right.
Their costs may or may not go up. I mean, collectively as a county, our cost to dispose of will be the tons of material that we don't recycle will be going to the landfill.
Right.
So we know that we can quantify that, but I don't know how to break it out by.
Well, then there's got to be a larger cost to that, because you're going to fill up your landfill.
That's a little harder to quantify, but you're right.
A lot faster.
Right.
It's a lot of people adding a lot of more garbage in.
But sometimes you put that pressure out there like that, it makes the other come around. It's terrible to say, but sometimes you put that pressure on that end, it's going to make everybody realize we have got to do something. We can't keep doing this.
On a little side note with all of this, when I did Manufacturing Day, I went up to Owens, and one of the problems, I think we talked about it, one of the problems that they have up there is, back in the day, and I remember when we all first started recycling, we put our plastic in here, we put our glass in here, and everything was separated. Now they can't, it's almost cost prohibitive for them to get recycled glass, which they could use. I mean, surely with Anheuser-Busch, we've got enough brown beer bottles around here that we could collect and send to them. I mean, there's got to be some sort of mechanism where it isn't so ungodly expensive for them to be able to collect clear and brown glass to help out with their facility. So where are we with that kind of thing, with helping to be able to utilize manufacturing with what we're collecting without it being cost prohibitive? Or is there such a thing?
Ms. Jordan has been looking into different options with the glass process.
Oh, good.
So she's still doing her research, and so I haven't gotten what the outcome of that is as of yet. So, but I did speak with her because I knew that would be a question today. So,
because there are some states where we lived in Michigan for a time where we paid a deposit on our glass,
Yes.
and then we brought it back, and
You get
you took it in the back, and you got a voucher and paid for your groceries.
Let the Cub Scouts
that way. But you wonder as
pick up all the
as the recycling, as this becomes more of an issue, you know, how is the Commonwealth looking at it? Not just James City County. What are they doing to? If we've got this kind of participation at our county, I would imagine we're a pretty active state in recycling.
Yeah.
So they need to take a peek too and try to.
You had an item up on your PowerPoint that we really didn't talk about at all, which is the reduction of waste. I think you had there, at least you'd had on the
25%.
It was on the.
Is that right?
I didn't see that.
Statewide, 25.
Oh,
No, the idea of sort of going at it from the other direction, not having to recycle something, but just not using as much stuff.
oh.
And I don't know that there's anything we as a county can do in that regard.
Well, that was under her suspend the program while they explore additional recycling service options and waste minimization strategies.
Right. Yeah.
So composting, other types of things at our recycle centers. You know, so there's different options out there, and we haven't fully dug into that. You know, that option yet, but it is. Those are things that are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there'd be powerful interest involved in some of these things, but you know, I think we're going to have to move to things at the state or national level that start dealing with packaging, reduction in packaging. You know, every little tiny thing you buy is coming in 2 pounds of plastic.
It's this big and you only use that much.
That you can't get open.
That's a big
You can't get open as a go, right.
Unless you're a 5-year-old.
That's why I really hate it.
I think basically, I think we're in good shape. Grace, you have any questions?
I do not.
Steve, anything else to add?
For some reason, Grace, I'm picturing you with the little coin thing on your belt going house to house, collecting
the balls.
Yeah, no, collecting the money for the. I'm here to get your recycle money.
Yeah,
click. Okay.
But I'm assuming there are some options like even billing every 6 months on your property tax bill.
We've looked at options. So the answer is we.
I guess you can't cross over with JCSA with water. So going to monthly, is that a possibility?
We've talked about those kind of things too, so we'll see.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. We just didn't get too in the weeds with that, but there are options. Yes, sir.
Before you obviously wanted to just get direction from us first. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
It is.
Depressing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a little more complicated than people think.
Yeah. In my household, we put out more recycling than we do regular garbage.
We do too.
We've gotten to where it's about 2 to 1.
But just as a matter of sort of future planning, I would again be interested in at least exploring the option of the county providing waste disposal with this rolled into it. Obviously, it's a complicated issue, and I would want to. I mean, if it's legally permissible to, try to build in requirements of contracting so that groups that might be dislocated would have a good shot at continuing.
And most of them will probably go to the larger communities where it'll still leave a lot of the rural areas for the smaller haulers and all that do it now. They'd probably keep their customer base. I wouldn't think that would probably change much because they're that's who I use, one of our locals here. And so it works out.
Was a local.
Yeah.
They were locals and then they became national.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to board requests and directives, which I don't know that we've had that on a work session.
But who on you?
I was.
Oh, yes, that's correct. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll start with you.
All right. Very good. I did want to say that I think everybody might have seen an email that came from the V3, the Virginia Values Veterans group, inviting us to participate. And I know that that's going to staff. I hope we can get somebody trained and into that fairly quickly because that's something I think we really need to do. The other thing, I sent an email back to Scott, and I know that concerned me, the issue about where tax payments were going. We got the email from the gentleman, and the question I had was this a change from last year? Because, for most of us who pay our taxes through our mortgage company, I have no idea where it goes. I mean, it's all electronic with that. But if you were somebody who's been writing that check on a year-to-year basis, if that was a change and they weren't aware of it, I need to see, if we can maybe find out why it didn't get publicized. And I don't even know for sure that it was a change from last year.
It was a change. It might have been 2 years ago.
This is the second year. Second year. Okay.
It has been on our website. It was on the bill. It is being forwarded.
Okay.
So it's a man, and so there were notices, but anytime you put stuff out, it's still hard to communicate it well. We did have a citizen that found out, hey, the address changed and got very concerned, and talked with 3 or 4 of us today. But in talking with the treasurer's office, they said that absolutely it's the postmark date. So even if it takes a week or 2 or 3 to get forwarded, it will be forwarded. It'll be postmarked. That's the date they use, and so we wouldn't be penalized. But that is still ongoing. And you're right. I would assume mortgage companies are probably used to that across the country. But many of us set up things on a bank pay where we're not necessarily having to look for new addresses all the time.
Well, if it's being forwarded, I think that alleviates a lot of the concern.
It is, and we are, as I understand it, in the second year of the change, but they'll still get there this year too.
And it was presented to us, I guess, 2.5 years ago, and in order to better collect and put one thing in charge, and it was I think it was a cost savings as well at the same time when that was presented.
I just walk mine over to the building.
Yeah, say that 45 cents. That's right, I do too. Here you go.
40 cents.
45.
55.
Yeah.
It's gone to 55, I think.
At least 50.
Well, since you bring that up, I realize that this is a federal issue, but I just want to bring up that I have heard from several citizens about the mail.
Yes.
And I myself am having a continuous problem. I did not get mail last Monday or Tuesday. It was not during the holiday, and not that I'm the most popular person in town, but I get mail daily. And so when I don't get mail, I know there's an issue. And I received another email this morning that there was a neighborhood that did not receive mail. So I don't know if someone on staff can communicate with someone at a post office to check and see, because this was James City residents that are not receiving their mail.
My neighborhood gets its mail at 6 p.m. or later.
Oh yeah, 8. I've had it come at 8.
We'll take 8 o'clock. It's just these are neighborhoods that are not receiving it in our case it was 2 days in a row. There just wasn't any mail.
Well, we can make the inquiry and
yes, we have no jurisdiction over. We realize.
Just be nice to know.
But could we check in to see what's going on, possibly?
Did you get my Thanksgiving?
I had 2 quick.
That's why we didn't.
I was wondering what happened to it.
2 quick things I wanted to mention. I had the opportunity to go with Mr. Stevens to Jamestown Rediscovery to get a nice tour there with Dr. Horn, and appreciated that very much. I also wanted to mention that on Sunday I attended funeral services for Carlisle Ford, our former Commissioner of Revenue, passed away after an illness, and just want to extend the county's condolences to the family of Carlisle, to his wife Kathy and stepdaughter Lynn, and other family members. Carlisle was quite a prodigious figure in the community, worked as an inspector in our county offices for a while, and then moved on to the elected position of Commissioner of Revenue, and was very, very much involved in everything. Yep. Thank you. Sorry to go ahead.
On that note, I would like to add that our condolences to Dr. Richardson's family. She served on the Board of Community Action Agency, and she passed away unexpectedly this past week. So we got the email about that, so we'd like to offer our condolences to them as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to follow up. I had talked at our last meeting about if there'd ever been a citizens group about an intersection. I'm just following up to make that plea again. And then just to bring to your attention, you all may have seen it or may not have seen it. Jared Antal, it was a Lafayette grad, baseball player who was a JMU student who was hit by a hit-and-run driver as a student at JMU and has been hospitalized since then. He's now undergoing rehabilitation. But our community really came together through Paul's down in Newtown and then in the city, and a bunch of moms did this and had the businesses gave 10% of their proceeds towards his family to help with all these things with the hashtag Stay Strong Jared. So we just want to send our thanks to all of the people that are trying to make that happen and to support his family, and also to wish Jared a speedy recovery.
And I wanted to throw one more thing in. I said I had to extend my personal thanks to all of you on the board, because in my entire life I have never gotten flowers before. But that was very, very nice to come home to that.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. All right. With that, we are going. So I should mention that Supervisor Eisenhower and I have our school liaison meeting. We have gotten some answers to some questions that were sent. I'm sure they will be gone over. I did send out an email to say that if you had additional, to let us know. We won't be covering those in our joint meeting, but we will be doing it in our meeting in December. But to just know that when we see the CIP on the day of our joint meeting, it is going to be in the amount increased of what those requests were for. So if we approve that those will come off, the CIP will drop. So does that make sense? Okay, that was a lot.
So it's wishful thinking.
But
so I'll move to adjourn.
So we're going to adjourn till 8:30. Yep, December 6th.
December 6th.
Yes.
We're at the Stryker Building.
Stryker Building, yes.
Very
So we've had a motion. Mr. Stevens.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We're adjourned.